Alright, what's going on, guys? Yesterday was the premiere of the first Shadow of the Erdtree gameplay trailer, and we got so much Elden Ring news that broke all at the same time, much of which got lost in the flow on the internet. But outside of the trailer itself, there was so much more information pertaining to the DLC and the actual gameplay we'll experience in Shadow of the Erdtree, the majority of which came from Miyazaki himself, where he broke down the overall story, how we're going to gain access to the DLC, the level design, difficulty, the biggest lore mysteries we'll have to uncover, and a whole lot more. Now, there were many different interviews done with Miyazaki that broke yesterday, the majority of which aren't in English, so I'll do my best to convey the information in an understandable way, but we have a lot to get through. So as we begin today, if you want to stay up to date on all things Elden Ring DLC and enjoy breaking down the news, lore, and discussion, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's get into it. Now, I read through many of Miyazaki's interviews, and the one I found to be the most interesting was done with Famitsu. So we're going to hit the highlights of other interviews, but then dive in deep on this Famitsu one. But let me preface this with a few things. This interview was conducted entirely in Japanese, so we are going to be working through Google Translate, and it's pretty rough. And they also bounce around quite a bit, going from overall lore to gameplay to discussions about weapons and such. So just keep that in mind as we go through it. But let's go ahead and categorize some of the information we got, starting off by talking about George R.R. Martin's involvement. As for George Martin's involvement, essentially it's the same as it was in the base game, said Miyazaki. The DLC Shadow of the Erdtree is based on one part of that original mythos that he penned for us. It's not a brand new mythos that he's written specifically for Shadow of the Erdtree. He has not created something new which informed the design of the DLC. It's simply another part of the original story that we thought would fit to tell as a new expansion. He goes on to clarify this a bit in other interviews, saying there were bits of Martin's work that did not fit in the original Elden Ring story for the main game, and that as we play the DLC we'll learn why that was. And we'll expand more on that in a bit when we get to the lore section of this. But now let's talk about how we're going to gain access to the DLC. The interviewer asked Miyazaki about the Miquella's cocoon and the arm hanging down that was mentioned in the trailer. Miyazaki responded, yes, the cocoon and arm you saw in the beginning of the trailer, this is actually the point of entry to the Land of Shadow, where the players will enter to the DLC area. And this does have some relation to Miquella, and Miquella has, as we said, traveled to the Land of Shadow. He does have some motive and some objective there, which we don't want to give away too much, but essentially the player will be following in those footsteps in the same way they followed the blessings from the Grace, the sites of grace and the lands between. They'll be following in Miquella's footsteps, and these will guide them through the Land of Shadow and reveal that motivation to them. Now, there were a few extra details given, in that in order to actually activate the hand, you have to have killed Mohg and Radahn. Now, of course, to get to Mohgwyn Palace you would have to kill Radahn, but I do also wonder if you can still take the portal in the consecrated snowfields and access it that way without killing Radahn, but we'll just have to wait and see. And I do find it weird how he only says that this hand has some relation to Miquella, when the game does say multiple times that that's actually Miquella's body, but that's a rabbit hole we can go down another time. Now let's talk about the size and design of the DLC. It was confirmed yesterday that the DLC will come with a $40 price tag and also sit around 60 gigabytes, but here's what Miyazaki had to say. The interviewer asked about the volume of the DLC and how this one has taken much longer than any of their past DLCs, to which Miyazaki responded, that's right, we apologize for keeping you waiting. However, when it comes to the volume of the DLC, it is clearly larger than DLC for Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and I have no doubt that this will be our biggest DLC to date. As to why they made it so big, he responded, to provide that Elden Ring-like experience, we felt that the volume was necessary. Although there are challenges to overcome, there is a sense of adventure typical of Elden Ring, with the freedom to take on those challenges, the excitement of exploring the unknown, and discoveries and encounters at the end of that exploration. He was asked in other interviews about pure surface area how big would it be. He didn't want to go into detail about that, but said it would be roughly bigger than Limgrave. And personally, I'm thinking that's probably the understatement of the century. But even if it's not, this DLC is going to feel much bigger, and that's because of the design. He says, we've prepared something new that's different from the field of Elden Ring's main story. It includes not only open fields, but also legacy dungeons and smaller dungeons. It's larger and more diverse than the main story's Limgrave. This time we wanted to go more in depth and bring a denser and richer level design, which brings these type of layout together in a more seamless manner. There of course will be large open areas and legacy dungeons, but we've also experimented with something a little more in between these, as well to bring a more diverse gameplay experience. So essentially what he's saying there is that instead of having just space for space, you'll still be able to wander and get lost, but you'll have a much more handcrafted experience in that exploration. Further, there will be over 10 new boss fights plus plenty of new weapons, equipment, and skills to find, and 8 new weapon categories have been added to account for new weapon types. He then goes into specifics about these weapon types, saying first of all we have a direction that's relatively close to the classics, such as large katanas, but we also have a direction that's more distinctive and highly novel. For example, it might be like a fighting game inspired by a monk, or something like a dueling shield that combines offense and defense, and there are also throwing daggers where all attacks are throwables. I think even those who have already used the weapon types in the main story will find it refreshing and enjoyable. So we have 4 out of the confirmed 8 there: colossal katanas, martial arts fighting styles, dueling shields, and then throwables. But another confirmed elsewhere are reverse grip swords. So a lot of creativity going on here, and it's going to be really interesting to see what the other 3 are. But take a look at this. When asked, are there any new elements unique to the DLC, Miyazaki says, level up elements limited to the DLC have been added. I think it's easy to understand if you imagine something like offensive power in Sekiro, but apart from the conventional levels, there's offensive power that's only effective in the DLC field. This was prepared for the freedom to challenge threats that I mentioned earlier, and it allows you to say things like, this boss is tough, so let's explore another area and try again after becoming stronger. This makes it easier to experience even at high levels. So it sounds like there's going to be some kind of unique level scaling only in the DLC to give you that same feeling of progression like you would in the base game, even if you're already a really high level. So that one caught my attention a lot, and I hope we get more specifics pretty soon because it sounds very interesting. But some other gameplay elements he touched on across the interviews are boss difficulties, saying that there would be a boss on par with Melania, but it will be optional for those that want to seek it out. And then of course he said there would be a poison swamp, because he likes making poison swamps. But some bad news pertaining to the gameplay details. Miyazaki did confirm that there will be no new ending to the main game, and the DLC will be its own self-contained story, which I was really hoping to get a new ending, but he did say there will be elements to make it feel as though you've completed it even going back to the main game. But now let's talk about my favorite part, the lore. When it comes to the Land of Shadow, here's what he had to say. The Land of Shadows, which is the setting of the DLC, is separated from the Lands Between, which is the setting of the main story. It has the image of being separated and hidden from the outside world, and the veil is also a symbol of this. He also goes into detail about the plot. I'm not sure if people remember this, but the main story was simply about following the guidance of grace. This time, we'll be following in the footsteps of Miquella as he heads towards the Land of Shadow. Also, NPCs who follow Miquella's footsteps will also appear. They become the storytellers of the DLC, interact with the main character, and sometimes become friends or enemies. The other main focus of the DLC story will be the past of the Land of Shadows and the past of Queen Marika. He then goes on to say that even though we're going to be learning about the past, the events of the DLC take place in the present tense alongside the main story. Another point of discussion was this lion boss, and Miyazaki says that Lion Dance is, in a sense, a DLC-like boss. In fact, the Land of Shadows is the place where Marika became a god and the Golden Tree was born. Naturally, there was a culture that existed before the Erdtree, and the Lion Dance character is derived from that culture. So I hope you can feel the scent of a different culture, which is a little different from the main game. And in case you guys didn't notice, it's not an actual lion. It's like a Chinese lion where a bunch of people are under a cloth, using the lion head as a weapon. As he stated, it's a dance. But the final point we get to learn more about is Mesmer, the main villain of the DLC. We can speak to this character a little bit. As you say, he's a key figure of the DLC. We believe he will be officially revealed to be Mesmer by the time the trailer goes live, and yes, he is a key figure in the DLC. He has this important element of shadow to him, which is a key theme throughout the DLC as well. And you may have seen at the end of the trailer there was this piece of key art where it shows Mesmer sat in his throne-like chair, and the people who've played the game may recognize this throne to be one of those from the boss room where you battle Morgoth. This represents the thrones at the base of the Erdtree, and it's supposed to symbolize that Mesmer stands on equal footing to the other demigods and children of Marika who sat around in these thrones and held the rooms of the Erdtree. So he is an important figure who rivals these other demigods, and as you play the DLC, you'll learn a little about why he wasn't featured in the Legends of the Erdtree in the Lands Between. You'll realize why he exists in Shadow in the Land of Shadow. Now interestingly, in the Famitsu interview when asked about this same part, Miyazaki appears to confirm that he is one of Marika's children, but again, we are working with translation on this one, so even though it appears to be the case, we may want some more official confirmation. But that is everything we know about the DLC so far. Tons and tons of information there. I'm sure even more is going to be coming out in the next few days and weeks, and we have a lot to break down with what we already have. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that because we're going to be following every piece of information like a hawk, and you are not going to want to miss that. But if you didn't catch yesterday's breakdown of the trailer, make sure you watch that too. But if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.